Okay, so here it is, the RunCam Thumb Pro box, and it's very similar to any other RunCam product, pretty straightforward white box here. On the side here, you have the model name. It says Sky, not Thumb, and it says 4K 30 frames per second, 2.7K at 60 frames per second. So there's multiple resolutions and frame rates with this camera. So we'll talk about the specs a little bit later. All right, let's see what's inside. All right, so you're greeted here first by the camera. Pretty nice, let's get it out of here. Wow, this thing is, wow, interesting. It's very small, just different than the first RunCam Thumb. Besides that, you get, looks like an instruction manual. And below here, you have some accessories. You have a micro USB to USB-A cord, which is good. And that'll be used for flashing the firmware or just powering up the device. Now you have a bag here with some goodies on here. You have some TPU mounts, and it looks like a mount for the actual camera, and a harness to connect this directly to your flight control. So this is a really important cable right here. I wish there was two of them in here, but one should be adequate for now. Okay, so let's take a closer look at this Thumb Pro, and it's very similar in design to the original Thumb with the vents, the button on here. Very, very similar indeed. The only difference here is just this larger lens right here. It protrudes out a little bit more, and obviously that's because of the larger sensor and lens combination on this camera, giving you a higher quality image. So we'll take a look at that and talk about the specs on this sensor a little bit later. But besides that, it looks identical, same kind of color sheen, that kind of black with some sparkle in there. It's really nice. The first thing that stands out here to me is just this big old lens, and you know, it is significantly larger, obviously, and it's just like, wow, that looks very small but huge at the same time. Now this one feels a little bit heavier and is heavier than the original Thumb. Let's see how heavy it is. Now RunCam says this weighs 16 grams, so let's take a look and see if that is true. All right, there you go, 16 grams, so it is pretty accurate. Now talking about the larger lens and sensor combo, this is obviously a 4K sensor, and it gives you a lot of options as far as frame rates. Now you have 4K at 30 frames per second, 2.7K at 60 frames per second, 1440p at 60 frames per second, and 1080p both at 60 frames per second and 120 frames per second, which is pretty awesome for super slow-mo action filming. Now talking about the lens, you also have this removable filter right here, and it's similar to the original one, and you just twist it and it comes off. Now this, I think, is a really cool design. Now the original had a removable or replaceable filter as well, as you can see right here. And this is also a twist-off design, but a lot of users indicated that this thing would fall off unexpectedly. So this redesign here is simpler and I guess more secure. Now this kit comes with 3 ND filters, ND8, ND16, and ND32, and that helps to create a natural motion blur as you're recording 4K images with your camera. Now this lens offers a 150 degrees field of view, which is pretty wide of what we want in FPV cameras. Now in that same sense, there really isn't any way to change the orientation of the sensor. It does record in 16:9, but we'll talk about this a little bit later. You can change the orientation of the camera, and then that can record either vertically or upside down. On the back here, you have your SD card compartment. There's a door right here, and it's pretty secure, guys. Now the previous one had the similar door for your SD card, and as you can see, it was kind of loose. Now on this one, it's a lot more secure, and I wish there was a screw to secure it on here. Now here's your compartment. This takes a micro SD card, maximum of 256 gigs. I have a card right here. I'll use 128 for now. This is pretty cool. We'll just insert that in there. All right, pretty secure like the original Thumb. Now we talked about the vents earlier, very similar. This thing needs ventilation. Obviously these cameras get hot, especially with the higher frame rates and the high resolution. Now to the left, you have a port here to power on the camera, and it's significantly different than the original port on the original Thumb. As you can see, it's a little bit larger than the original Thumb. Now as you can see, there's actually 4 wires here, and that corresponds to the harness that was included with the bag. And this does a little bit more than just powering up the camera. You can also control the camera remotely if you wire this up to a free UART on your flight controller, and therefore you can have full control or control of your camera with your radio. So that's a pretty cool feature. Now lastly, you have a micro USB port on the back here, and that's used for power on the device or just using to update the firmware on the camera. Now the original Thumb had little to no setting changes in the original firmware. You couldn't change anything. What you got was just 1080p and whatever profile they put on this Thumb. Now later on, they did release a new firmware allowing you to change some of the parameters and settings in this camera as far as exposure, white balance, but it was still limited to the stock frame rates and resolution. Now, in my original review of the RunCam Thumb, I did indicate that I wish that they would release an app to control the settings of this camera. Well, apparently RunCam listened, because now the settings on this camera can be changed with the RunCam app, and that allows you to change the resolution, frame rates, and even the orientation of this Pro camera here. Okay, so let's fire up the RunCam app. Now this app is available for both iOS and Android. I have the Android version right here. And the default goes to the RunCam Thumb Pro, as you can see right here. And that's what we have, so we won't change it, but if you have another camera, you can easily change it right here. We're gonna select the RunCam Thumb Pro, and what you need is this QR code configuration. And what this is gonna do is that once you select all your parameters that you want, you can hit apply, and it will generate a QR code. And all you have to do is just point the camera to the code, and it will change the settings in the camera. Now, some of the settings you have here is the video quality. You have high, medium, and low. Obviously, you want to choose high for the best image quality. Loop recording, 1 minute, 3, and 5, or off. Auto record, we'll keep that off for now because I want to hit the button to actually start the recording. As far as resolution, you have 4K 30 frames per second, 2.7K 1440, 1080p, and 1080p 120, as we talked about earlier in our specifications. Now, as far as volume, you have FPV or normal. Obviously, you want to choose FPV because this is an FPV drone, and that considers the wind when you're flying the drone. As far as the shutter, you can change that to shutter speed, whatever you want to. Sensitivity, ISO. Usually the lower the ISO, the better the image quality. So for now, let's go with 100. It might be a little too dark. And then you also have your color style, normal or flat. Now, if you choose flat, it's gonna be a little bit flatter. Now, the idea behind the flat color profile is that it's gonna generate a higher dynamic range. So if you do wanna grade it in post, then you'll have a better image quality per se. For now, we're gonna keep it normal. Besides that, you have other or further parameters if you go to general, and then you have even more. You can add a date stamp on here. Here's the option here for the image rotation, 0 degrees, which is normal, 90 degrees, 180, which is upside down, or 270. So you have a lot of options when you're mounting this to your drone. White balance, auto. This can make or break, your image. I'm gonna put it for sunny right now since it's sunny outside. Low light image enhancement, auto shutdown off, and then your power supply frequency is also important, and that's based upon your region, and that's gonna either eliminate the flicker in your videos if you have lighting in your room. I'm in the US right now, so 60 Hertz is the correct one. If you live in some other parts of the world, then 50 Hertz might be the correct one for you. And that's all done right here. So all I have to do right now is go to apply, and then here's your QR code. And it gives you a little step-by-step guideline. So it just shows you how to do it. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So it actually walks you through it. And here's my code right here. Very, very nice. And it gives you the details of what you just chose right here. So let's power this camera on and see how the image looks. So I have my battery bank here. I'm just gonna plug this in right here. It's powered, and as you can see, you have the red light right here. So it is being powered on. I'm not gonna change any parameters. I'm just gonna see how the image quality is straight from the camera. And I hope it's in 4K, or I don't know what the default setting is, but we'll see once we take a look at the footage. I'm gonna remove this lens protector right here and see how it goes. So let's hit the record button and take a look at this image. All right, so it's flashing red, indicating that it is recording. So what do you guys think about the image here of the new RunCam Thumb Pro? Now, I have studio lighting in here, so the lighting is pretty decent, guys. But what do you think about this? Now, there's no image stabilization in the camera, but there is gyro information in here. So I can now take this image, put it in a pulse or a stabilization application like, GyroFlow, and that could stabilize the image from the camera. Having said that, now how is the audio on the RunCam Thumb? Now we do not have this in the normal mode, we have this in the FPV mode, so it might sound a little bit different. How's the image on that? So we'll just stop the recording here by pressing this button, and the recording should stop. All right, the recording did stop here. Now I haven't looked at the image yet, I just unplugged this, just recorded this. Hopefully you can see the image for yourself and make a determination if this is good enough for you. Okay, so let's mount this Thumb Pro to my drone. And we just have to slip this through here. Should be fairly simple. Well, hopefully, fairly simple. It's a tight fit. Tight fit, but it fits pretty well, actually, guys. Not bad at all. So this is all good, guys. This thing is ready to go. So let's take this for a flight and see how the Thumb Pro performs. Okay, so we're back from our test flights, and the RunCam Thumb did a pretty good job. This thing performed really well. The image is super clear, and it's a huge step up from the original Thumb, both in resolution and bitrate. Now, there was some jelloing in this camera right here, but I do suspect it was due to the drone here. Now, these propellers might be a little bit out of balance, or maybe the flight controller, but I did notice some vibrations in this. Now, I did switch the camera to another drone, a Cinelope. This is the Pavo 25. And the image was significantly better on the Pavo 25. So depending on your drone that you're using, the size of the propellers or the motors. Now the Thumb Pro does have optional ND filters. I did opt for that. We do have a set of 3, and the ND filters did help out significantly, just like the original Thumb. Now, I don't think you really need it, but the image does look a lot better. You have better motion blur, and I do highly recommend you do spring some extra cash to get that ND filter kit. Now the field of view on the RunCam Thumb Pro is 150 degrees, and I thought nothing of it. I thought that would be pretty good. Even after reviewing the footage on this camera, I thought nothing of it until I compared it to the DVR footage. Then I noticed that sometimes if I'm tracking an item, I would see that it would be pretty good in the actual DVR, but then it would be kind of cropped out in the actual Thumb Pros. Now that's something that they can improve on even in this V1, because you do have this removable lens right here in the front. Maybe they can make a lens attachment to make the field of view a little bit wider with the attachment. That's something they can think of, and I'm sure it would do really well with the FPV community. Now, as far as colors, the Thumb Pro did a pretty decent job, guys. Really accurate representation of the colors. It's really vibrant in the normal or factory settings. The only thing I noticed was that the colors were a little bit warmer or more red than normal, and that's something you can change in post, or maybe change the white balance. For me, I live in a sunny climate, so I did have the white balance set to sunny, but it was still just a little bit warmer for my taste. So maybe if you change the white balance or just change it in your editor, you might have some better results. But overall, the colors were actually really good, guys. As far as dynamic range on the Thumb Pro, it was actually pretty good, surprisingly pretty good. Now, the dynamic range on the original Thumb was just okay. This is a lot better. Obviously, it's a different sensor in here, but sometimes when I'm flying, I would just do a pan around, and this thing exposed really well, guys. Even when the sun was in view, I could see the houses or the grass. Even the water was well exposed. So pretty good HDR on this camera. Now, talking about dynamic range, the Thumb Pro has a flat color profile, and that gives you more flexibility when you want to color grade or edit your video in post. Now, I did use that color profile, and honestly, guys, I didn't see any discernible difference to the normal mode. Now, the image was a little bit brighter. I don't know how they're doing that, whether they're increasing the ISO or changing the shutter speed, but it does look a little bit brighter, and the saturation is just slightly, and I mean slightly, lower than the normal mode. My advice would be to just keep it in the normal mode and just reduce the saturation 1 notch, and or maybe the contrast as well, and then just get into the post edit and then just add your saturation and or contrast later on to your liking. As far as audio in the Thumb Pro, it did a really good job, guys. Now, you have 2 options, normal and FPV. And for the most part, I did fly this camera in the FPV mode, and it sounded pretty good. It eliminates all the wind noise, yet lets you hear the noise from the motors and the propeller. Now, I also tried normal mode, and the audio was crisp and clear. All this can be changed in the application. Now, talking about the application, that's one of the best parts of the Thumb Pro. Now, I indicated earlier with the original Thumb review that I wish there was an app for it, and they came through with the Thumb Pro and having the RunCam app compatible with this. Now, as a person that likes to tweak and change camera settings, this was a welcome surprise. And that was honestly one of the best experiences I had with this camera so far, was just changing the settings on here. Now, obviously, I'm doing a review, so I'm changing the settings very often, but out in the field, I could just change my settings, point the camera at it, and I could change each parameter. So that's really awesome. I'm glad that this feature is now brought to the Thumb Pro. Now, it does get a little bit more complicated if you want to shoot in manual settings. Say you want to set your ISO or your shutter speed. So now you have to set your parameters, record, check your footage to see if the exposure is right, and then change it again. So it's 3 or 4 different steps or 3 or 4 different processes just to make sure your exposure is correct. And that can be easily fixed if there was a Wi-Fi chip in here. This can send a signal to your RunCam app and see a live view to set your framing and your exposure based on the environment. And that's something that they can improve on the second version of the Thumb Pro. So having said all that, what are my thoughts and conclusion on the RunCam Thumb Pro? Well, if you see my original review on the original Thumb, you know that I love competition among manufacturers. It breeds innovation, and we all benefit from that competition. Now, the Thumb Pro is no exception. It provides a lot of value for the performance it's delivering. Now, is this better than a Hero 8, 9, or 10? Not really, far from it. but you have to make a really good argument to choose another manufacturer other than those cameras that's better than this Thumb Pro. So if form factor, weight, and price is your priority, the RunCam Thumb Pro is hard to beat. Now, if you want to see a comparison between the RunCam Thumb Pro and other budget FPV cameras, leave them down in the comments below and I'll make that video. So thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.